Hey, this is David, pastor of Hamilton Life, and I want to thank you for taking a listen to our podcast. For more information on our church and how you can support the ministry, you can visit us online at hamiltonlifechurch.com. Thanks again for taking a listen, and we hope you enjoyed the podcast today.
Father, we thank you so much for this beautiful opportunity to sit in your house and to acknowledge you and who you are and where it is that you're leading us. So, Father, may we stop ignoring you in our everyday lives. May we stop ignoring how you're slowly and subtly petitioning us, drawing us, and calling us closer to you. So, Father, may we focus in on how it is that you are reaching out to us so that we may understand where you're leading us. So, Father, we thank you. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen. We've been working through Ephesians. Just forever. We've been going through it. We are on week 10, I believe, of Ephesians. We've got 3 more weeks to go. I have thoroughly enjoyed, though, looking at the book of Ephesians. I've enjoyed looking at how Ephesians walks us through our faith in Christ. And so if you've been here for a while, you know we've been talking about this in various ways. But the passage we're on today, and we've been on for the last couple of weeks, and we will be on again for 2 more weeks, is Ephesians 6. So we mowed through Ephesians, and then we got to Ephesians 6, and I said, let's just hold on a little bit. Because in Ephesians 6, we get to the armor of God. We get to the armor of our protection, and I didn't want to rush through. Most sermons that I've heard have just been blanket sermons on the armor, but I've wanted us to really pick apart each piece so that we can fully understand what God's saying to us. And so if you've been here the last couple of weeks, you know we talked about the belt of truth. We talked about the breastplate of righteousness. You'll never forget Keith and his Kevlar. I talked last week about the sandals of peace. We talked about peace. This morning I want us to talk about the shield of faith. The reality is, for you and for me, is that Ephesians 6:10 carves out our lives. It says, finally, brethren, be strengthened by the Lord and his vast strength. Put on the full armor of God so that you can stand against the tactics of the devil. For our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the world powers of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavens. That Paul is starting strong by reminding us that we're in a fight. And we talked last week a little bit about how we're all in a fight, every one of us. You're in a fight now. And if you look back through your week, you can look at the fights that you've had for your mind, the fights for your family, the fights for your job, that we're constantly in a battle, you and me. And we're winning battles and losing battles by the second. But because we're in a battle, Paul knew that if we stopped and we paused and we refused to recognize that we're in a battle, we would refuse to engage in the battle. And if we refuse to engage in the battle, we would never prepare. But just because you aren't prepared for the battle doesn't mean you're going to face one. Just because the moment that your feet hit the ground, you refuse to acknowledge the fact that you're in a battle does not mean that you're not in one. So I'm telling you, I'm imploring you, every single morning, you wake up ready to engage in the fight that awaits you. And we prepare. And Paul tells us exactly how to prepare. He says, stand. And I think it's critical that he tells us to stand, because I feel like a lot of us have been knocked on our feet. Anybody been knocked on your feet in the last couple of weeks? Yeah, you get knocked on your feet. And it's easy when you get knocked on your feet to stay on your feet. Stay on your butt, not your feet. And what Paul says is, you've got to stand. You've got to stand. In order for us to fight effectively the enemy, we have to stand. That we can't fight on our backside. We can't fight sitting down, that we fight standing. He says, stand therefore with truth like a belt around your waist, righteousness like armor on your chest, and your feet sandaled with the readiness of the gospel of peace. In every situation, take the shield of faith, and with it you will be able to extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Here's what's beautiful, is that we get to this place where we're talking about the shield. And more often than not, when we get to a place where we talk about the shield, we imagine that the shield is a form of protection for us. But more often than not, we imagine that the shield is a way for us to hide. You know what a shield looks like. It's generally the size of a person, and you hold it. And we imagine that the shield is there in place for us to hide behind. Anybody tried to hide behind their faith? That we think that the shield is there for us to hide behind. And what happens more often than not is we are content with hiding behind the shield of faith. But do you know that God did not intend for us to hide? That Paul's not describing an opportunity for us to hide, but he actually invites us to step into the arena. But see, a lot of us, we don't need the shield of faith because we don't step into the arena. We are content with living a life of comfort. We are content with living a life that is void of anything potentially evil, and so we stay hidden behind our shield of faith to the point where we never have to take that with us, but God is inviting us into the arena. But do you know what happens in the arena? There's fights, there's battles, there are arrows being shot the moment you step out into the arena. And some of us, you're forced into it. As we walk into a workspace or a college campus or a high school or middle school, you can break that down as far as you want. You're forced into the arena of life. But a lot of us, we're more content with hiding behind the shield than we are taking that shield with us. But the intent that faith is the shield is not for us to hide behind it, but for us to advance, for us to move forward. And Paul says, you must take up the shield, and with it you will be able to extinguish all arrows of the evil one. That I don't want to live my life in a way that I don't need faith. That I look back at so many moments, days, weeks, even years, where I didn't need faith. And isn't it interesting how when everything's going well in our lives, the bills are paid, the kids are well, you're caught up on all of your housework, like there's no pressing needs. Isn't it interesting how when everything is going well for us, faith comes really easy, doesn't it? Faith is easy when everything is going well. However, the moment something shifts or deviates from what we're comfortable with or what is normal to us, all of a sudden faith, specifically faith in God, becomes much more challenging. So what happens for us as human beings is we strive to hide behind the shield so that we're never confronted or forced into having to exemplify faith. We stay behind it instead of advancing and taking new ground, and that's not God's intention for our life. We don't hide. However, we know that the moment we step out into the arena, arrows are going to be shot. Shots are going to be fired. And many of us, we don't take the shield of faith with us because we don't live a life that requires it. But in those moments where life has turned itself upside down for us, it might be something subtle or it might be something dramatic. All of a sudden, our faith in God is called into question. All of a sudden, everything that we believe in is challenged, and faith in God becomes very difficult. There are those moments where flaming arrows are firing at us at rapid pace, and we don't understand. But here's what's so fascinating about Paul describing faith as a shield, is that in a secular world, suffering is never meant to be seen as something good or positive. In a secular world, arrows being flown at you is never seen as a positive thing. And what's fascinating is that Paul doesn't describe the shield of faith as a way to hide, but as a way to stop the arrows. They're coming at you. They're going to be fired towards you. That the shield is there to protect you. But what's so beautiful is that he doesn't say you're to live your life in an arena or in a space where arrows aren't thrown, where arrows aren't shot. But he's saying they're going to be shot at you, so let's step into the arena, because in a secular world, suffering is never meant as a viable part of life, but we will never understand the power to diffuse the enemy's arrows if we'll never step into a space where arrows are being thrown at us. Put more simply, you can get that. You want me to get it? Put more simply, is that we will never understand God's power inside of us until we step out into the arena and we're challenged. And a lot of us, we don't understand what we're capable of doing through Christ because we've never actually stepped out into a space where we're actually tempted or challenged. We don't understand what we're capable of doing through God because we stay behind the shield of faith. We stay at a level of comfort and we never move past that. But as we branch out and we move out, we start seeing how powerful our God is. That the scriptures don't describe a life where arrows aren't thrown at you. But they describe a life where arrows are thrown at you, but you've got a shield of protection to keep you from being hit. And that's the space we have to embrace. We have to understand how critical it is that we can't stay hidden, but we have to be able to step out knowing that we have the shield of faith that is for us, that we all face great challenges to our faith. But in James we find he's penning this word, he's penning a letter to a group of people who have been dispersed. These people were at their wits' end. They were at the worst. They had been kicked out, dispersed from their lands. They had nothing to their name. And James is penning these words to him in a greeting. And he says in James 1:2, he says, "Consider it great joy, my brothers, whenever you experience various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. But endurance must do its complete work so that you may be mature and complete and lacking nothing." Can you imagine encountering someone who's just experienced pain or loss or hurt or something traumatic in their life, and your greeting is, "Hey, consider it joy. Consider what you're going through to be joyful." This is the fastest way to get punched right in the throat. The idea isn't that Paul is saying, "Hey, suck it up." The idea isn't that Paul is saying, "Hey, whatever you're going through pales in comparison to what other people have gone through, so just know that it's going to get better one day." He isn't saying that. What he's saying is that he is inviting us into an opportunity to grow and to mature and to create endurance through life's most difficult moments. What he's doing is he's saying, arrows are going to be coming at you. So let's see what we can learn in the process. See, I love the idea that we follow and trust a God who doesn't spare us from life's biggest challenges, but knows that we're going to be experiencing these challenges anyway, and so he's chosen to use those challenges to help create the person that he's called us to be. But a lot of us, we run from those challenges. We run from those moments. We run from those experiences. We run from those times of testing in the wilderness. And when we run from those times, we miss what God's trying to do and create in us. And what James is saying is, growing up is tough. In order to get to maturity, it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to be difficult. Anybody remember what it was like to be in middle school? AJ and I were just in the lobby talking about this. The most awkward time of your lives. I don't remember it, so unfortunate, but I would imagine it was awkward. Here's what I do remember is that at some point between 13 and 15, I thought it was a good idea to get a perm. There are no pictures to prove it, so you can take that for what it is, but I thought this is a good time in my life, you know. Alexi Lawless, the soccer player, was famous, and I couldn't grow a goatee, so I thought, let's perm it, you know. I have red hair, and when you perm red hair, you immediately start to look like Ronald McDonald, and so I embraced the awkwardness of middle school and fully stepped into it, you know what I mean? Beat up a lot as a kid, probably. The idea was, though, that at 15, my greatest struggles, other than the perm thing, was, which was a very brief period in my life, the greatest struggle was to get rid of acne, right? Like, that was a big problem at 14, 15. You're like, why is my face doing this thing? And when you get to 18, your biggest problem is, you know, trying to find a job or to try to make sure you're going to be able to meet the right one. You start feeling this pressure that maybe you'll never get married, that your struggles and your challenges, they shift and they change, and some are still worried about acne too. And when you reach 25, you start wondering if you're pursuing the right career, wondering if your life is headed in the direction that you want it to. And inevitably, it never feels like it is. And so you're constantly evaluating and reevaluating where you're going. By 30, you start worrying about your family. You start worrying about your kids and taking care of them. You start worrying about your future. Like, for the first time, you start thinking, like, maybe I need a retirement fund. You know what I mean? Like, this might happen. I might get old. And then at 40, you start worrying if, like, every ache and pain is normal. You know, like, is that the same thing for you? And then as you get, I haven't been to 50 yet, but I'm sure it'll be a new struggle. That the idea is that at 40, we don't struggle with the same things that we do at 15. At least we shouldn't. And you know those people. They haven't grown up. They're still trying to figure life out. They're still trying to figure acne out or whatever. They're still struggling the same way you would at 14 or 15 or 16 or 18. But they've physically grown, but they haven't as spiritually or mentally grown. So the reality is we've got to go through those pains in order for us to grow. I've said this before, but I think it's probably the most powerful thing I've ever heard or read or said, is that the reward for fighting any battle is that you get to fight a greater battle. And if you look back through your life, you fought these little battles, and these little battles, the reward for those were slightly bigger battles. And slightly bigger battles produce slightly bigger battles. And as AJ and I were talking, I remember taking care of an infant and learning how to change a diaper, and that was hard. And then it's grade school and toddler or whatever, and they're running around, and you're just trying to keep them from killing themselves. And then you get into middle school, and I don't know what we're trying to do. You're just trying to survive. It's just tough. But it's called the growth and maturity that we walk through. That what James is describing is that if we refuse to embrace the challenges that God puts in front of us here or allows us to go through now, we'll never get to where God wants to lead us. We'll constantly and perpetually be that 40-year-old who's still struggling with 15-year-old problems. That we'll never get to a new problem. We'll never get to a new struggle. And in the process, we'll never understand what God is trying to teach us. I don't know if you're like me, but there are certain lessons that God's trying to teach me, and I refuse to learn them. And so I'm doomed to repeat them. You know what I mean? Just right back around to trying again. And finally I get it. I'm like, finally I've learned. And God's like, all right, let's go to the next one. I'm like, no, let's just stay here. You know what I mean? Because suffering in a secular world is never meant as a positive. And so I actively shrink back. I actively retreat from any form of struggle or challenge or growth opportunity. Because left to my own demise, I'm telling you, I will seek comfort and conformity over faith any day. And you're probably the same way. That many of us, we're missing out on what God is trying to show us or teach us. We're missing out on who God is trying to create us to be, because we're content with who we are, and we're content with the problems and struggling with these things, and we can never get past those. But here's what Paul is saying, or James is saying rather, Paul would probably agree to. He's saying, that was a weird J. He's saying, consider it joy. Consider it joy anytime you endure trials or temptations, aches or pains. See, here's what I know about faith, and it's very little, is that faith is 99.9% how we respond to the circumstances that we're facing. It's how we respond. Will we embrace the arena? Will we embrace the fight? Will we step forward into the flaming arrows? Or are we going to shrink back? See, when we consider it joy, it doesn't mean like I'm going to Disney World in a couple of weeks. No, I am. I'm just telling you. But that's not the point. The point is, it's not, hey, I'm so excited and elated when problems happen. We're not masochists. We're people who understand that bad things are going to happen. We don't look forward to it. I can't wait to experience loss. I can't wait to experience pain or hurt. We don't embrace it in that way. That's not the joy that it's talking about. What it's talking about isn't that we're excited about the next problem that's going to come. The scriptures are talking specifically about us understanding at a very deep and cellular level that there is this sense of joy that we understand. It's not happiness. I'm elated. I just got a trip to wherever. It's this joy, this deep sense that we know that God is in charge no matter what chaos and storm is around us. We understand. And therefore, we can move forward and respond to whatever challenges we face with the joy that God is our strength. And in James 1, it says, consider it great joy, my brothers, whenever you experience various trials. And the reason that we consider it joy is because we know that the testing of our faith produces endurance. That you can somewhat find solace in the reality that whatever trials you face are going to produce endurance. That there's a reason and a purpose. And in 1 Peter 4, it says, dear friends, don't be surprised when the fiery ordeal comes among you to test you as if something unusual were happening to you. Instead, rejoice as you share in the sufferings of the Messiah, so that you may also rejoice with great joy at the revelation of his glory. See, if we don't consider going through trials with great joy, we'll never grow into the person that God's created us to be. If we can't embrace this idea that we're going to experience problems regardless, because as human beings we go through problems, but problems can be problems and that's the end, or problems can be learning opportunities to create endurance in our lives if we'll embrace this with a joyful heart, understanding that God is in control. If we'll keep trusting God, we will find something so much greater than happiness. We'll actually find deep inner contentment. We'll find deep joy. And this isn't a suck it up and deal with it. What he's describing is a reminder that God is in control, regardless of what happens. And I promise you, I've been there waiting for test results. I've been there wondering if we could pay the bills. I've held my kid's hand before surgeries. I've stood by the caskets of many dear friends and family. I don't take this passage lightly. I have been in many terrible situations where I did not want to consider it joy to be in the middle of them. But what I did find to be true on the other side of every single tragedy and potential tragedy and fearful moment is that God was there and he was stretching me and he was teaching me the limits of my faith and he was inviting me to trust him at just a little bit more, just a little bit more. And those moments were times for me to hold my shield and not take steps backwards, but to take steps forward. Even if they're really tiny steps, we still take them, knowing that we're taking ground one way or the other. And when God invites us into these moments that we consider horrible, they're moments for us to learn not our own limits, but they're able to teach us how powerful our God is, that as followers of Christ we realize that God uses the hardest moments of our life to refine us and to teach us and to stretch us, to create endurance. But the thing that stands out to me the most when we look at Paul's description of the shield of faith is that he describes the shield of faith and he describes these flaming arrows, not just arrows, because that's bad enough, but these arrows are on fire. And he's describing these arrows, and when he describes the shield of faith, he says, we have the shield so that we can extinguish the flaming arrows. I like language. I think there's something very purposeful in the language that we use. That's why interpretations of the scriptures are so critical. That's why how we understand the passages of the Bible are very important to us. That he doesn't say that you're going to avoid the flaming arrows. What he says is you can extinguish their flame. What he says is you're going to be able to stop the burn. He's not describing a life that we don't get hit by arrows. He's describing this life where we can extinguish the burn, and we do that when we consider these trials with great joy. When we embrace whatever life is teaching us, whatever God is teaching us through life, and we can extinguish the flame. The second thing that he's creating in us is he's inviting us to endure. He's inviting us to endure. He says, but endurance must do its complete work in us. The trials that we experience in life will either lead to endurance or bitterness. Have you ever known people, and maybe you're one of those persons or people that they've gone through this trial and on the other side they've become bitter? I understand. I completely understand. But this opportunity is set before us every time something happens that we don't understand or don't like, something that happens that shakes us, that upsets us, is we have the opportunity to allow God to create endurance in us and a deeper trust and faith in him, or we can get bitter and angry. And I've been bitter and angry. And the end result to bitterness and anger is never a positive thing, but if we'll slide to the endurance side, we'll see how God creates in us something much more powerful and sustainable. But we have to intentionally understand that God is still in control. Even when we don't understand what he's up to, he's still in control. And when we understand this and we embrace it with joy, we'll find that we create endurance. But here's the reality, is that every one of us, we want faith. If we were to poll the audience, if we were to poll our city, everyone wants faith. But not everyone wants to be faithful. And the way that we approach faithfulness says a lot about our faith. Will you trust God regardless of what comes your way? If everything's good in your life right now, you'll nod your head. Yeah, sure, why not? But the moment something shifts or changes, our faithfulness is called into question. But we can't have faith without faithfulness, and that's what God is trying to create in us, that we will constantly fight this fate versus faith, this comfort versus fate versus faith. And if we are not careful, we'll trust fate over faith. We think that life is just happening to us. That if we'll remove God from the equation, we just imagine that the universe is against us. Anybody ever heard somebody say the universe is just against me, or maybe the universe is for you? The universe doesn't care about you. But what we do know is that the God who created the universe is for you. And fate does not have a place in our lives. We understand God has purposed every step of the way, and we need to trust that he is in control. So we choose faith over fate, and watch how God creates in us endurance. In Romans 8:28, it says, we know that all things work together for the good of those who love God, those who are called according to his purpose. No matter what flaming arrows come your way, we can trust that God is at work. Now, I don't get this. I'll be honest. I've been through moments where I cannot see how God was there. I've been through moments that were difficult and I saw how God was there. I've been through moments that are difficult that I didn't see that God was there. I didn't see on the other side how God was going to use those for good. But I have to trust because I want faith. I have to be faithful. So I have to trust that God knows more about my life than I do and that he's working all things out for the good of me. And so I choose to live by faith and not fate, trusting that God is leading and guiding me and will gain joy, and through that we'll gain endurance. But the growth is a natural response from a life spent trusting God. That the natural byproduct of us enduring and causing joy or stepping into joy is growth. That growth is a natural byproduct of a life spent trusting in God. We all want growth, but we don't all want to go through the process that growth takes us through. You want to learn a new skill, or you want to be wiser or more well-read, or you want to get better in a certain area. It takes time, attention, focus, and effort. That it's not handed to us, that when it comes to spiritual growth, it's not just an automatic. It doesn't matter if you've been following Christ for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. It does not mean that you are more spiritually mature because of time. Time does not mature us spiritually, though it certainly can. The reality is we have to choose to grow in our faith. But I feel like a lot of us, myself included, we're content with where we are. I've got just enough faith for what's happening and for my family and for our current situation that I don't really know if I can have enough faith to go beyond that. I've got just enough faith for where I am. So if I stay here and I don't move, no sudden movements, then I don't ever have to have more faith than what I have right now. And a lot of us, we're stuck. We're stuck living a life that is only as big as we have faith for. And what's crazy is that God believes in you, and he believes and he's called you to a life that's bigger than you've ever imagined. And I don't just mean that you're going to be rich and famous, you know what I mean? Like, that's not a guarantee, but God has called you to live a life that's bigger than you imagine. But so many of us limit God because we have limited faith. And we've seen over the years how we've pushed those boundaries of our faith, and we've seen God come through in huge ways that we never expected or imagined. But then every time I see that, I'm like, wow, I need to have more faith next time. And then I just shrink right back to that small amount of faith. I just trust God to do what he's doing right now. I just trust God to take care of, to manage, and I can't see beyond that. But we'll embrace this joy through trials, and we'll embrace this endurance mindset that will keep our head down and focused on Christ and keep moving regardless of what comes our way. Then we'll start to see our faith expand, and we'll start to see us step into the life that God imagined. And in James 1, it says, the reason that we see endurance and the reason that we see trials as joyful is that maturity, that we will become mature and complete and lack nothing. We will be mature, complete, and lack nothing. The end result is for us to grow. That you can measure someone's maturity by how they handle adversity. I can evaluate my own maturity by how I handle adversity. The moment I get a flat tire, the moment that something tragic happens in a relationship or family or something in my life, the moment money doesn't come through exactly when I think it should, the moment that I've got to pay a bill and I just don't quite know how I'm going to do it, the way that I handle and conduct myself in those moments of adversity speaks to my maturity and growth in the Lord. And if I want to stretch beyond that, I have to trust God for more than just what I have. It's easy to trust God for what I have. Do you notice how easy that is? I trust God to take care of what we already have, what's already been done, and we're good there. But to trust God for the future seems really scary because what we've done is we've forgot that God is the God of the future. You heard the phrase Godspeed. The phrase Godspeed, I love that phrase because it's inviting God to go faster than us. But do you know that God's already there? He's already in your future. He's moving faster than you. He's ahead of you. And he's actually ahead of you, preparing the way for you to get there. And so whatever you're experiencing now, God knows you're going to need that experience in order to get to where he already is. And so when you get that text or you get that email or you get that phone call when something tragic has happened, God's already gotten it. He's already gotten it by years, and he's already prepared you to be able to handle it if you'll just tap into what he's already done through you. See, we think that we need something supernatural in order to get us into the future, but God is creating you, the future you, right now. And what you're going through now is preparing for what you're going to go through in the future, so embrace that. We don't seek it or want it, but we embrace it. That whatever God's doing now is preparing you because he's already in the future. But so often what we've done is we've imagined that our faith is for us alone. That we say, my faith. It's my faith. It's my faith. But what I find to be absolutely fascinating is that your faith is not just for you. See, there are people around you that are counting on you. They're trusting that you'll have some faith for them too. That your faith is not just for you, but it's for the people around you. And when Paul is describing the shield, what's beautiful about the shield that the Romans used is that the shield wasn't a shield like we would imagine. I imagine a shield that would be, my size, and I would hold it in front of me, and I could hide behind it, duck around, look around, move around, but I'm behind my shield. That wasn't the intent of the shield. That the shield was actually situated most often on the left side. And what would happen is that the shield would cover the soldier's left side and the soldier next to them's right side. That the shield would cover my left side and it would cover someone else's right side. That the shield wasn't just for you, but it was actually for your company. It was actually for your units, your platoon, whatever verbiage you want to use. And what was beautiful is that there was this formation. And they would form in this specific way, and the formation has a fancy term that doesn't really matter, but there's this formation that they would form. And you can imagine if you've seen like the end of Gladiator, and they're all kind of formed, and they have their shields up, and they're all protecting one another, that there's this formation that the Romans would use that would be impenetrable. The enemy couldn't get through it. But here's the reason it was impenetrable. It was impenetrable because everyone worked together. That their faith together, their shields together, formed this wall that the enemy could not get through. That your shield alone leaves you vulnerable, but when you link up to other people and their faith holding their shield, all of a sudden you become impenetrable. That your faith is not just for you, but your faith is for the people around you as well. See, there are people waiting for you to exemplify faith on their behalf. There are people who don't have faith, who haven't picked up that shield. And you've got your shield, and you're just hiding behind it. But what we've got to do is we've got to position our shield where we're not just covering ourselves, but we're covering the people around you. But we also have to position our lives in a tribe like this one so that we're not just counting on our faith, but we're counting on the faith of others around us as well. That our faith together linked up cause us to be impenetrable as people as we enter into the arena. But when we lay our shield down, we're vulnerable. When you lay down your shield, the person next to you is vulnerable. When your faith starts to become weak, the people around you are vulnerable as well. So what we've created and what happened in times of war as well is that when a soldier was injured, when a soldier became too weak, he would drop back in rank. If you imagine like geese as they fly, they get tired, they go to the back. You probably knew this, but they keep rotating as they're flying. So the person in the front who carries the most of the weight and the wind resistance gets tired and moves around. See, I believe we fight the same way. You may not have faith right now, so borrow mine. So duck behind mine. So fall back in the ranks. I think the intent of a soldier when he was wounded was he would fall back, he would rest up, he would get healed, he would get well, and then he would get back in the battle. But see, a lot of us, we get wounded, we get hurt, we lay our armor down, and we just walk off. We just leave the battlefield. We don't ever heal up, we don't ever get well, and we don't ever re-engage. See, I think some of us in this room, you've been healing up for some time. It's time to re-engage. Some of you, you've got to keep healing. Some of you, you're still wounded, you're still hurt. There's still those wounds that are right there on the surface, and you've got to heal up. You've got to do the work and allow God to do the healing work in you to get ready to fight again. But some of you, you've been knocked down and you just haven't gotten back up again. It's time to get up. It's time to fight. It's time to step into the arena once again, knowing there's arrows flying. There's arrows flying consistently, but we don't go into the arena alone. You don't go to battle by yourself. That we go to battle as a company. We go to battle as a tribe. That we link our shields together. And we march forward. and we take new ground together, because it's not just your faith, but it's the faith of those all around us who are pulling together, inviting God to show us a way that he's working in our lives, to see that there's joy in our trials, because they're creating endurance in our hearts and faithfulness in our lives so that we can grow. And even though I don't want to go through the process of growth, I understand how necessary it is for me to grow in my faith. I understand how necessary it is for us to grow in our faith. But we'll never grow if we will not create endurance and if we will not understand how God's trying to do that in our lives. So this morning, what I want us to do is I want us to bow our head and close our eyes. So go ahead just across the room, and I want you to bow your head and close your eyes. And I want you to consider just this past week. Maybe you need to go a little further and consider these past couple of weeks, maybe a month. I want you to look at some of the battles that you've been fighting. Look at some of the battles, maybe even that you're in this morning. Maybe you're in a battle right now. I want you to evaluate your win-loss record. I want you to evaluate the battles that you've won and look how God's come through for you. Look at the battles that you've lost. Were those moments that you laid down? Were those moments that you laid your shield of faith down? Were those moments that you stepped outside of your tribe and became susceptible to the enemy's arrows? See, I believe together we're going to continue to win these battles that create endurance, that create growth, not just in our church, but in our lives. So what areas of your life have you lost faith? Have you lost trust? Have you lost hope in God? What areas of your life have you laid down the shield of faith? Maybe you need to pick it back up. Maybe you've altogether been knocked down and you just refuse to get back into the fight. Maybe it's time to re-engage. Maybe you've been on the front lines of these battles and you're hurt and you're wounded and it's time to fall back. It's time to rest up. It's time to get healed. It's time to allow God to restore you. There's nothing worse than someone who's wounded and doesn't recognize they're wounded and they still continue to fight. Those wounds continue to reopen. Those wounds continue to get worse. That it's time to drop back. Allow God to heal you. And then in his time, re-engage. So where are you at this morning? As we sing this morning, I want you to continue just to contemplate, reflect. I want you to talk to God. Maybe it's your first time talking to God in a while, but I want you to have that conversation with him and invite him to comb through your life. We'll come up and close in just a moment.